just to help them.
Instead of this, it's more like this. Yeah.
So really, it's started 15 or 13. Very assertive man.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Madeline Lewis. I'm the EEO advisor here at the Commission, and I'd like to welcome all of you, Chairman Wellinghoff, our guest speaker, who will be introduced shortly, guests and friends, to our 26th annual Black History program. I think we should give ourselves, that's right. We have a wonderful program planned for you today, so please sit back and enjoy. And I have one brief announcement. On Wednesday, February 15th at 10 o'clock, here in the Commission meeting room, we will have the founder and chief executive officer of the Negro League Legends Hall of Fame, Dwayne Reno Sims, and Levi Chappie Drew, baseball legend who used to play with the Indianapolis Clowns. So please join us for the second half of our Black History Month celebration. At this time, I'd like to introduce our chairman, John Williams.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate it very, very much. And as Madeline has indicated to you, we do have a great program today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to FERC's 26th Annual Black History Month program. And I especially want to thank our guests, Miss Alila Bundles, for consenting to speak today. This year's theme, Black Women in American History and Culture, invites us to pay special tribute to that role that African-American women have played in shaping the character of our nation. We continue to celebrate a rich legacy of African Americans and honor the notable contributions that they've made to this country. As courageous visionaries who've led the fight to end slavery and tenacious activists who fought to expand basic civil rights for all Americans, African American women have long served as champions of social and political change. From the literary giants who gave voice to their communities to the artists whose harmonies and brushstrokes captured hardships and aspirations, African American women have forever enriched their cultural heritage. Today, countless African American women have shattered glass ceilings and advanced their common goals. So in recognition of their legacy, let us honor their heroic and historic acts for years to come. The achievements of African American women are not limited to those recorded and retold in our history books. Their impact is felt in communities where they are quiet heroes who care for their families, in boardrooms where they are leaders of industry, in laboratories where they're discovering new technologies, and in classrooms where they're preparing the next generation for the world we will inherit. As we celebrate the successes of African American women, we recall that progress did not come easily, and that our work to widen the circle of opportunity for all Americans is not complete. With eyes cast towards new horizons, we must press on in the pursuit of a high-quality education for every child, a job for every American who wants one, and a fair chance at prosperity for every individual and family across our nation. Again, I say welcome to all of you, and thank you. And let me give you a little personal note as well. How an African American woman was very instrumental in my life. Many of you know that I went to Howard University, and I there got a degree in teaching mathematics. And there was a woman there, one of my mentors, Beth Howard, who was really an inspiration to me and has been inspiration throughout my life. And so I've been very touched personally by an African American woman who was very strong and very dedicated to teaching children and understanding how children need to have a good education. So with that, Ed Pereira is going to introduce our guest.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Edward Pereira. I work for the Office of the Executive Director, and I was asked recently to introduce our distinguished guest. And I can tell you it's an honor and a pleasure having gotten to know a little bit about Miss Alelia Bundles. As I asked, I'm so careful with the pronunciation of names, and she said it's like Amelia without the Amelia. So before I was asked to introduce today's distinguished guest, I have to admit I didn't know anything about Alelia Bundles, or how big of an impression that she's made on our society. And although she's here to speak about one of the greatest Black American women in our history and the influences that she has made, I also want to recognize Ms. Bundles for her accomplishments. Once I had the opportunity to speak with her and share with her some of the ideas and some of the things that I had learned about her, I realized that it was really my pleasure to be able to stop, as busy as we are, and I work in the technology field here. So much information goes past us, and what I recognized and what I shared with her this morning was that we don't really get a chance or take the opportunity anymore to stop and listen and understand some of the things that happen in our lives that are of great influence to us. And I can tell you that that what I did learn about her and what I continue to learn about her, she's inspired me to stop, look and listen and learn a bit more about women in history, Black women in history, honoring Black History Month, and I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. I'd like to share some of the words that came to mind when I learned a little bit more about Ms. Bundles and the impact that she has made and continues to make on our world's community. Accomplished. She's a critically acclaimed author and professional speaker. She graduated at the top of her class at Harvard Radcliffe University in 2000. I think it was 2000. I was going to say 99, but I just rounded up a bit. Dedicated, she's enjoyed a 30-year career as an executive and producer in network TV news. So all of those things that don't happen, the blunders that you don't see, all of those great newscasts, you can probably lend a hand, and actually it was local here, to the accomplishments of Ms. Bundles. She's written several books that have been recognized as some of the best writings on Black women's history. Again, today's experience will allow me to stop and recognize some of the things that have been accomplished by our great Americans. Inspiring. She's appeared on NBC's Today Show, Good Morning America, CBS one of my favorites actually, CBS morning news or morning show comes on at 9 o'clock. I got my second cup of coffee, and I like to hear about. And actually, they just recently had some things about Black History Month. She has been published in the New York Times New York Times book review and Oprah magazine, and has gotten an opportunity to meet Oprah. And as she said this morning, if Oprah calls, she'll only take it on the second call. She spends a good portion of her extended professional career traveling across the country, speaking of her legacy and the accomplishments of what our theme is today, which is Black women in America's history and culture. And those are just some of the highlights of whom A'Lelia Bundles is and the mark she continues to make on our society. So now that you know her a little bit better, as I've gotten to this morning, it's easy to understand where her drive, focus, and energy comes from. None of her accomplishments were accidental. They were on purpose. She had a plan. She decided to be a leader and make an influence in the history of our country, and following in the legacy and footsteps of who she'll speak about today, who is one of the most influential women in Black history. Ms. Bundles is here to share with us a little bit more about the life and times of one of the most influential and accomplished women in our nation's history. Her name is Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made American woman millionaire, who also happens to be the great-great-grandmother of A'Lelia Bundles. Without further ado, it's my honor, distinct pleasure, and privilege to introduce Miss A'Lelia Bundles.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's really nice to be here. I've had a nice tour in your beautiful building. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Thank you, Commissioner Wellinghoff. We had a really nice chat. I know a lot about his children. We talked about Las Vegas. And most important, he has turned me on to a new app for my iPad. Thank you, Ms. Lewis, for your hospitality. And Ms. Jeter, where's Ms. Jeter? Ms. Jeter and I have been talking on the phone for the last 24 hours, getting me up to speed about what's going on. So I'm really glad to be here. And you know, this topic on African American women in history and culture, it's like, really? You're supposed to talk about that in like 20 minutes? That's like a book and a library and, an entire country. But the truth is, African American women are everything. We are courageous, and we are not. We are brave, and sometimes we are afraid. We are beautiful, and sometimes we need work. We are CEOs, and we are maids. So we are all of those things. Now, I don't know there we go. Who's doing that? Who's helping me out? Huh?
Just wave your hand.
Thank you. I always love the IT person. Thank you very much. So, I talk about Madam C.J. Walker because she's my great-great-grandmother, and I will talk about her. But today, I just thought I was inspired to look at some other African-American women in history. So before I talk about Madam Walker, I just want to use this opportunity to inspire myself, and I hope inspire you. So I found some quotations, some things that I have run across through the years. And so as we look at this beautiful picture of Judith Jamison, who you recognize from Alvin Ailey, I wanted to read some quotations that sort of embody who Black women are. Mary McLeod Bethune said, "Next to God, we are indebted to women, first for life itself, and then for making it worth living." Georgia Douglas Johnson, who was from Washington, D.C., said, "Your world is as big as you make it." Zora Neale Hurston, "If you haven't got it, you can't show it. If you have got it, you can't hide it." Lena Horne, "It is not the load that breaks you down. It is the way you carry it." Mary McLeod Bethune, Cease to be a drudge, seek to be an artist. Zora Neale Hurston also said, sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It is beyond me. Maya Angelou, courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. And finally, Sadie Delaney of the Delaney sisters said, life is short and it's up to you to make it sweet. So let's go back to the slides. Now, let's see, am I doing, there we go, perfect. So I just thought we should start with some women in history and women, comparing them to women in the present. And because I'm at FERC, I wanted to start with my friend from Indianapolis, Vicki Bailey, who was a commissioner, who many of you know. Are you smiling because you know Vicki? You know, she worked with. So I'm going to tell her that I was here. In fact, I want to take a picture in the commissioner's seat so I can show her that I was sat where she used to sit. And then Shirley Ann Jackson, who is currently the president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, but who used to be the chair of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So she's a physicist, so I don't know how I could even think about what goes on in her mind. Aviation, Bessie Coleman, the aviator, and Mae Jemison, the astronaut. Just to remind you the accomplishments that African American women have had. Here's a woman you may never have heard of, Sadie King Taylor. She was a nurse during the Civil War, and she was a teacher. And today we have Helene Gayle, who is CEO of CARE. Helene has worked at the National Institutes of Health, and she's worked at the Gates Foundation, really a pioneer in health care for women around the world and in HIV/AIDS research. Magdalena Walker, those of you who are from Richmond know she was the first American woman bank president. And today Carla Harris is an investment banker who makes great waves and does wonderful things, and also is a philanthropist and a gospel singer. So she's a multidimensional woman. Charlotta Bass, you may never have heard of her, but she was the publisher of the California Eagle. She was very involved in civil rights, and of course now we have Gwen Ifill, who moderates vice presidential debates and is on TV every week. Mary McLeod Bethune, whose home is on Thomas Circle, was an educator, president of a college that she founded. And now we can look at Ruth Simmons, who is the retiring president of Brown University, the first African-American woman president of an Ivy League school. Patricia Roberts Harris was an ambassador to Luxembourg and was a cabinet secretary for Health and Human Services. And now Susan Rice, who's been in the news for the last couple of days at the UN talking about the vote on Syria. Susan is about my height and a fierce lady. I mean, you would not know that she is 5 feet tall. Susan has a personality that's 7 feet tall. Constance Baker Motley, the first U.S. federal judge, African-American woman, and now Deborah Batts is in the same position in New York. Barbara Jordan, that voice. You know, just go to YouTube and listen to Barbara Jordan during the Watergate hearings. A fierce person who defends democracy. Kamala Harris is Attorney General in California now. Ida B. Wells, another fierce lady who was a journalist, who was one of the people who really forced America to look at the lynchings that were going on. And now Melissa Harris Perry. I don't know that Melissa has quite reached Ida B. Wells' heights, but Melissa is a fierce voice for women. Althea Gibson, first African-American woman to win Wimbledon, and of course the Williams sisters, who continue to win at Wimbledon. Lorraine Hansberry and Lynn Nottage, both women who have written plays for the stage on Broadway. Lorraine Hansberry, you know, from Raisin in the Sun. Lynn Nottage's most recent well-known play is Ruined, Pulitzer Prize winner. Gwendolyn Brooks and Toni Morrison, both Pulitzer Prize winners for their work. Cissa Winter Jones, probably almost nobody in here has heard of Ciceretta Jones, but she traveled to Europe, sang for the Queen of England in the 1890s. And today we have Denise Graves, a Washington, D.C. native. Ada Overton Hunter, the first woman choreographer. We don't really know much about her now, but she was an amazing dancer, an amazing choreographer, also performed for the Queen of England in the early 1900s. And of course, Judith Jamison. And now Madam C.J. Walker. I love having the opportunity to share her story with others. These are two young ladies, Titi and Miko Branch, who founded Miss Jessie's, a hair care company, and they say that they are very inspired by Madam Walker. And I love using this, the history and the present, to be able to make the connections so that we understand how much we've contributed, how far we've come, and how many opportunities we have today. So Madam Walker is somebody who was born on a plantation in Delta, Louisiana in 1867. Daughter of former slaves. She was an orphan by the time she was 7. She married at 14, she said, to get a home of her own to escape the treatment of a cruel brother-in-law. Had one daughter, my namesake, Alelia, who later became the joy goddess of the Harlem Renaissance, according to Langston Hughes. And when she was 20, her first husband, Moses McWilliams, died. So in the first 20 years of her life, she had more loss and abuse than, thank goodness, most people ever have in a lifetime. And yet, by the time she died at 51, she was the wealthiest self-made American woman, businesswoman in America. She also was a philanthropist, so it wasn't just enough to become a millionaire. It was important to use that money as a philanthropist, as a patron of the arts, as a social activist, as a person who made a difference in the world. And that's, for me, the most important part of living a life, is what is the legacy that you're leaving? And that's what these other women represent, and that's what I think this theme of Black History Month is this year, that we can be on this earth and we can sit around and let other things happen, or we can make things happen. You know, I appreciated the comments that you made about leadership. It's very hard to be a leader. Sometimes you don't really feel like doing it, but every day that we wake up, we have to figure out some way to make a difference. So Madam Walker founded her company in 1906. She was a washerwoman who was uneducated, and when she was 38, she developed a product. But after her husband died, she moved to St. Louis, where she had 3 brothers who were barbers. And they had a little bit more status than the average laborer. They still weren't rich, but their barbershop was very near an AME church in St. Louis, right down the block. And the women of the AME church embraced poor Sarah Breed Love McWilliams and began to give her a vision of herself as something other than an illiterate washerwoman. They made sure her daughter was enrolled in school. They began to help her become self-educated, to take night school classes. So she was transforming herself. But still, her life was very difficult. As a washerwoman, she was making $1.50 a week. But eventually, her hair began to fall out. And that was what turned her life around. Now, many people think, oh, Madam Walker, isn't she the lady who invented the straightening comb? No, she did not invent the straightening comb. So if you learn that in school, you have to redo that. Come back. She did not invent the perm. Her real issue is that her hair was falling out. And I won't go into too much detail, but basically you just think 100 years ago, most people didn't have indoor plumbing. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have central heating. They didn't bathe very often. You don't want to think about that too much. But I'm old enough to remember a number 2 tin tub at my grandmother's house after she went outside and pumped the water and heated it on the stove. So you can just imagine, bathing was not something that was frequent. Washing your hair was even less frequent. As a result, people had horrible dandruff. They were going bald. So that is what was happening with her. She was going bald, and she was experimenting with home remedies. There really weren't these kinds of products. Now you can walk into the drugstore and there's a whole aisle of hair care products. That did not exist. So she was a pioneer of the modern hair care and cosmetics industry, along with women like Elizabeth Arden and Helena Rubinstein. But she said, I was so ashamed of my frightful appearance that I prayed to the Lord for a solution. And one night in a dream, a big African man appeared, told me what to mix up for my formula. Some of the ingredients came from Africa. I sent for them. I mixed them together. I applied them to my scalp, and my hair began to grow back faster than it had ever fallen out. Now, I have to tell you, I think that's part of the truth. think she did have a dream, and I think that some things came to her and told her what to mix up. Even Einstein said that part of the theory of relativity came to him in a dream. But just like anyone else who develops something, there's trial and error. There were other things she experimented with. There were other products that were sort of primitive type products on the market. She worked for a while for a pharmacist. So she took in everything. There's nothing wrong with saying it didn't all come in a dream. She took in everything that was around her and applied that to this idea. And the real secret was developing a shampoo that allowed people to cleanse their scalps, and then an ointment that contains sulfur. So she began then to sell her products door to door, and women were flocking to her because they wanted their hair to grow in the same way that hers had. She developed her first product, Madam Walker's Wonderful Hair Grower, and a shampoo, and sold it in St. Louis, and then she moved to Denver, where her good friend Charles Joseph Walker, her third husband, moved, and they got married, and she began to call herself Madam C.J. Walker. And you can see this personal transformation. I think that's as much of the story of Madam Walker as it is of African American women in general, that the transformation that we have made through the years, through the decades, through the centuries, as well as the transformations that we can make in our own lives every day, every week, every year. She traveled around selling her product, developing agents. This is Madam Walker in Ohio. And then she moved to Indianapolis in 1910. She opened her first factory. And when she arrived in the city, there was a big campaign to build a YMCA, a black YMCA. In 1910, YMCAs were segregated around the United States. And there was this drive that had been initiated by Jesse Moreland, excuse me, how could I forget it? Jesse Moreland, those of you who went to Howard know Founders Library and the Moreland Spingarn Collection. Jesse Moreland was one of the first black secretaries of the YMCA. He had persuaded Julius Rosenwald, the head of Sears Roebuck, to pledge $25,000 to any city in America where the black and white communities would work together to raise the balance of $75,000 to build a $100,000 building. Now, $100,000 might build this room, maybe, today. Then it would build a great building. So the communities worked together. The leadership of the black YMCA and the white YMCA pledged to raise money. And Jesse Moreland came to Indianapolis to have a big rally, to get people to pledge and to get people excited about this desire to build a YMCA. And so people came from all over the community. And some of the leadership of the white YMCA, the businessmen of the community who were building cars and who were involved in the Speedway in Indianapolis, which was just starting then, stood up and pledged $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, very wealthy men who wanted to help this cause. And then to everyone's surprise, Madam C.J. Walker stood up, and she pledged $1,000. She said, I believe if I help our boys, it will help our girls. And that is what I am interested in. She knew that not enough was being done for the girls, not enough was being done for the boys, but she wanted to pave the way so people would have an opportunity that she had not had as a child. Well, people were stunned. No black woman had ever contributed that amount of money to that kind of cause. And then as she continued to travel, they were writing about her in newspapers, not just because of her hair care products, but because of her philanthropy. Her audiences got larger and larger, and people wanted to know, how would this woman who had been a washerwoman become able to contribute this kind of money to something? And so she decided that it was perfectly appropriate to attend the 1912 National Negro Business League Convention. That organization had been founded by Booker T. Washington, who was the most powerful black man in America at the time. And you can see Booker T. Washington. It is a laser. Wow, there we go. So, but where did it go? Anyway, Booker T. Washington is right in the middle. He's the man holding his hat. So she arrived at Booker T. Washington's convention. He had founded this organization in 1900. She arrived at the convention in her chauffeur-driven car, so nobody could miss her. Booker T. Washington knew of her. He had met her before. She had visited Tuskegee, really against his wishes, but she had just shown up with a letter of introduction, and he tried to, push her off, and he reluctantly gave her an opportunity to speak, but not in a keynote way. And she had met him because his wife was president of the National Association of Colored Women. Madam Walker had become a member. She attended the conferences, but she was not a part of Booker T. Washington's inner circle. But she arrived at the convention wanting to share her story with the 200 other delegates, to tell them about how her life had changed. And she knew that there were other people there who were the children of former slaves and former slaves themselves who now owned banks and pharmacies, real estate companies. And she thought her story was as powerful as anyone else's. But Booker T. Washington ignored her request to speak to the audience. On the second day of the convention, her good friend George Knox, who was the publisher of the Indianapolis Freeman, who's standing there in the light coat, stood up. He was a longtime friend of Booker T. Washington's. He had become quite a prominent man in Republican politics. He owned a barbershop that was in the fanciest hotel in Indianapolis. Lots of people knew him. He had a very stellar reputation. And he stood up and he said, "We should hear from Madam C.J. Walker. She is the woman who contributed $1,000 to the building fund of the YMCA in my hometown of Indianapolis. She has an incredible story to tell." Booker T. Washington moved right on, ignored Mr. Knox. And he said, "You know, we're discussing lifetime membership." And then he proceeded to call upon one of Madam Walker's neighbors from Indianapolis, a man named H.L. Saunders, who was not discussing lifetime membership. As it turns out, Mr. Saunders was a very successful businessman. He owned a company that manufactured uniforms for people who worked in hotels and who worked in service. He had a business that was a regional business with customers in Indiana and the 4 surrounding states. Madam Walker had a business that was an international business with customers all over the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America. As it turns out, Mr. Saunders had been the treasurer for the fundraising campaign for the YMCA. He had contributed $250. Of course, Madam Walker had contributed 4 times as much. Now, she was a good church-going woman, and I know she knew that when that collection plate went by, you were not supposed to compare your gifts to others. However, I can't help but imagine that she felt at least a twinge of resentment. So on the 3rd and final day of the conference, as the last banker was completing his remarks, Madam Walker stood at her seat, looked toward Booker T. Washington at the podium, and said, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face. I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the washtub. From there, I was promoted to the kitchen. And from there, I promoted myself. I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods and preparations. And I have built my own factory on my own ground." The next year, he invited her back as a keynote speaker. And in this picture, they are at the dedication of the YMCA in Indianapolis in 1913. Booker T. Washington was the keynote speaker, and he couldn't say enough good things about Madam Walker. And as it turns out, she contributed money to Tuskegee Institute. So, and by the time he died in 1915, they were colleagues. He had a great deal of respect for her, and she for him. So Madam Walker moved to New York in 1916. Her daughter had persuaded her to open an office there in 1913. She wanted to become much more involved in politics, and Harlem, of course, was becoming the center of culture and politics for African Americans. She became very involved with the NAACP's anti-lynching drive and was speaking all over the country on behalf of African American soldiers as World War I started. In fact, she was spied upon by a black spy who thought she was a little bit too radical, mainly because she was speaking out for civil rights. So she and Ida B. Wells were spied upon. They were called Negro subversives, which I sort of liked. About her, I liked the fact that she was a bit of a subversive. In 1917, the year before Mary Kay was born, Madam Walker had her first convention of her sales agents in Philadelphia. A young Marian Anderson was a member of the church and sang a solo. just before people knew who Marian Anderson was. At that convention, Madam Walker, like Mary Kay, gave prizes to the women who had sold the most products and who'd brought in the most new agents. But she also gave prizes to the women who had contributed the most to charity in their communities. And she said to the women in her keynote address, I want you to understand that as Walker agents, you are representing us. We want others to look at us and realize that we care not just about ourselves, but about humanity. At the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson urging him to support legislation that would make lynching a federal crime. So Madam Walker really was developing this army of women who were not just sales agents, but women who were becoming economically independent, who were making a difference in their community. She said that people often asked her the secret to her success, and she would say to them, there is no royal, flower-strewn path to success. And if there is, I have not found it. For whatever success I have attained has been the result of much hard work and many sleepless nights. I got my start by giving myself a start. So don't sit down and wait for the opportunities to come. You have to get up and make them for yourself. Thank you. Those two pictures at the end I showed because you were really quick. You were very good. Just to show you where the legacy is today. Madam Walker's mansion in Irvington, New York, Villa Loire, was designed by Vertner Tandy, who was the first licensed black architect in New York. It's still standing. It's a National Historic Landmark, a private residence, though I'm working with the owner, Harold Doley, who's an African-American investment banker, to try to change it into a public space. And then the Madam Walker Theater Center, if any of you have ever been to Indianapolis, hopefully you've seen this beautiful building that was built in 1927 with a beautiful African Art Deco motif in the theater with the tragedy and comedy masked with African features. It's really quite stunning when you see it. But those are the two National Historic Landmarks that we support to help keep Madam Walker's legacy alive today. But I thank you very much, and I think we are right on time, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Alila, we want to give you this plaque in recognition of your speech today, and thank you so much. It was so informative and so interesting that talk about Madam Walker. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and Ms. Bundles. Anton?
For those of you that don't know me, I'm Anton Porter. I'm the Commission's Deputy Chief Financial Officer. And on behalf of the Office of the Executive Director, the office that's sponsoring the event today, I'd like to thank Ms. Aaliyah Bowles for her engaging presentation. It harkens me back to words an important African-American woman in my life shared with me, my late mother. To those who much is given, much is expected. So I thank you for reinforcing that and reminding me of that precious wisdom my mother gave me. I'd also like to thank those that were involved in the ceremony today. Chairman Wellenhoff, thank you for your welcome and your comments. Madeline and Edward, I thank you for your role in the ceremony today. I'd also like to thank those that provided support for today's event. Judy Eastwood for photography. Mike Cunningham, thank you for your role in today, as well as the Yati Support Center. I'd also like to give a very special thanks to Doretha Jeter and the Special Emphasis Committee. Without your efforts, we know none of this is possible, so we're truly appreciative of that. I want to mention a very, very important event. The festivities are not over today. There will be a food tasting. recognizing some of the cultural treats within the African American culture. It'll be upstairs in room 3M, 4A, and B. So please join us immediately following this ceremony and participate in the food tasting. As a final act, I'd like everyone to stand up and lift their voices in song as we sing the Negro National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing. We'll have the very talented Kadia Givner lead us in song. Thank you, Kadia.
Okay, if you look at your programs, there's an insert with the first verse of the Negro Black National Anthem. And I will start, and you can join in with me, okay? All right, here we go. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan.
Oh.
Oh, yes, I do. You might have seen her on. Hi, Lillian. How are you?
Good. How are you, man?